Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Sarah Smith, and I have the pleasure of working with the Bucket Course Committee to bring you bucket courses each and every week. We're starting again this fall. This is our first session for the fall of 2025. I work at Grinnell College in the Office of Community Partnerships Planning and Research, and really excited to see everyone here today and get our fall semester underway, I guess I should say, with bucket courses. So a few reminders before we get started. Please make sure that you silence your phones. Please make sure if you have a T-coil, if you need to turn it on, that'd be great, because we do have that in this room. And then also, if you have a chance afterwards to stick around and put the chairs away, that'd be great, but no pressure. And then we will take questions at the very end. I'll come around with the mic. If you could please wait until I come to get the mic to you, and then you can ask your question. That would be lovely. So to start us off, we happy today to have the Poweshiek County Naturalist, right? I was going to say that, but then I wasn't sure. Naturalist, Amy Andrews Durbin here. This is very exciting. We were kind of on pins and needles if Amy could be here, because Amy has someone who's ready to, be here any day. So, so this is one of your out of office is on your email now. This is one of your last, events before you're done when this is over. So very excited to have Amy today with us. So I'll turn over in just a second, but Amy, I forgot also to mention to everyone, as a committee, we've decided to have these sessions go for about an hour. So we are going to change our format a little bit. I still will give you a break to get more cookies and coffee and bathroom. So we're going to go from 10 to 10:25. Then we're going to take about a 10-minute break, come back, and then a little bit more time with you, Amy, and then questions, and then end around 11. Okay? End around 11. So just a little bit shorter every week. If we don't I would love to hear your feedback. If this is not working for you, let me know. But we'd really like to keep it just to an hour, and then you can be on your way. So, all right, so get back to Amy. So excited to have you here. Not one of my favorite subjects to talk about, especially when I find them in my house from time to time. But I do love all the wonderful things that bats do for us and our environment in Iowa. So I'm excited to find out more about Iowa's bats. So will you please help me welcome Amy?
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I tend to be soft-spoken, so if you need me to speak up, please let me know. Okay, so we're going to talk about Iowa's bats. Really quick to start out with, why bats? So I don't know if any of you were here when I talked about owls, but my sneaky plan was that I was going to talk to you about owls. You would hopefully think, Amy's an okay presenter. I'd go to one of her talks again, and then I'd get you with bats. So Iowa's bats are really misunderstood. There are a lot of kinds of bats in the world, so actually it was probably a misnomer for me to call it Iowa bats. We'll kind of talk about bats from all over the place. There are some really cool ones elsewhere out there in the world as well. Why bats? So that guy right up there was one of my favorite college professors at Central College. And really, I wasn't even a biology major. I was environmental science, so I just took a few biology classes, but he led one to the tropics. So we went to Belize and Costa Rica on a college trip, and I really went because my friends were going, because that's what college students do, and it was amazing, and we got to do a lot of bat netting, because that's what he specializes in. And we'll talk about this, but there are many, many, many more bats, species of bats closer to the tropics, and that's true for all sorts of things, birds, insects, anything like that. But that was pretty magical, and then I came back and was like, well, that was fun, and ended up having a job. It was an AmeriCorps position where I got to work with bats for AmeriCorps. And I was looking to move back to Iowa. I had been working in Maine, and I was like, oh, well, this is a pretty good opportunity. And not that many people probably know as much about bats as me. And I'm no expert, but because I had that one professor, I probably knew more than the average Iowan. So I was like, okay, yeah, I would take that job. So we got to do all sorts of different work tracking bats. We were specifically looking into the northern long-eared bat, which was about to be listed for, like federally listed as endangered. And the crazy thing about this is that, and this is why my professor originally got into bats and why bats has been a really good career for him, bats are hard to learn about. They're hard to study. They're out at night and they're very small, and that just makes them kind of tricky. It's hard to see, hard to tell apart from each other, hard to get your hands on. And because of that, we have this species of bat that we know is valuable, right? We know they're all insectivores here in Iowa. And this bat was going to be listed as endangered, and we didn't even know, and we don't even know, where they hibernate. Isn't that wild? Like a basic part of their life, and we just like don't have a for sure answer on it. So that was what we got to help do, which felt like pretty important research. Unfortunately, we did not totally get it figured out because the batteries that you can use on a transmitter for a bat are pretty tiny, because to affix any sort of wildlife telemetry unit, right, any sort of thing where it sort of pings back its location, so you can see us standing over there with a big antenna, and the bat has its own little antenna, and those talk to each other. That's hard to do on bats because those have to have a battery, and the battery has to be tiny because a bat doesn't weigh very much, and there's a percentage of its body weight that any sort of transmitter can be, right? So it's really tiny, so you have to get your transmitter on in just the right window of time. So I also learned a lot about what it takes to do field science, right? So I'd been a science major. You can only do so much time out in the field in college, but I did get to have that really cool experience through AmeriCorps, which was fun. So you can see me cheesing it up with a bat down there, and the other girls on our crew. We had a really nice time. It was just probably 3 to 4 months that we really focused on bats for that job, but it was a blast. Okay, so now I have some true or false questions for you. Please play along. I ask you to vote with your thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs up if you think it's true, thumbs down if you think it's false. Hopefully I trick you. If I didn't trick you, then I did not do a very good job of assessing what are the common myths about bats. So that's what we're kind of going to focus on today as we go along. So this is not a true-false question, but do you know what kind of bat this is? This is the one who gets all the press. This is a vampire bat. Yeah, did you know that? Sorry, I should have called on you. Yes, this is one of the species of vampire bats. So true or false, do we have vampire bats here in Iowa? No, that's false, right? Yeah, okay, I heard it before I even looked up and saw it. No. There are only 3 species of vampire bats, 3 species of bats who feed on like blood specifically, and they all live in the tropics. And primarily, they're a pest to things like deer, or livestock. Do people ever get bitten by them? Sure, sometimes they do. But by and large, bats are not interested in us. And we did get to hold one or have one in our nets when I was on that trip in the tropics. And the only thing we did any differently is our professor made sure he had on like slightly heavier than normal leather gloves. And he has all of his rabies vaccines, so the rest of us were like, could only look, not touch, unfortunately. But it wasn't really much different than catching any other bat other than that. It was a little bigger. We'll talk more about other kinds of interesting bats in a minute, but that's the one that gets all the attention, so I thought we'd start with that. Okay, so true or false, the largest bat in Iowa weighs about as much as 4 or 5 quarters. Oh, you guys are good. That is our big bat in Iowa. It's this guy. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you think so. He is cute. Oops, sorry. So this is our hoary bat. This is our very biggest bat. So there he is again. You can see his wingspan. They have really nice coloring compared to some of our other bats. Hoary, so Hoary. Hoary means like silver tipped, right? Like hoarfrost that you see in the winter. And he weighs less than an ounce. So if you know how much you can put in an envelope and put it in the mail, right? That's about an ounce is what we allow you to mail without adding extra stamps. That's what this guy weighs. So that's another good way to think of it. And bats are usually measured in grams. Grams, I think I've always been told a gram is like a paper clip. I don't know. You can check me on that if that's right or wrong. But you can see we measure them in grams because they are so tiny. So yeah, that's our biggest bat. If you want to learn more about the bats that we have in Iowa, There are some really nice graphics that Iowa State has recently put out. I have a poster I should have brought with me, actually. But this kind of shows you their wingspans, and compared to the size of a goldfinch is that bird up in the corner. So you can see they are not too big. And if you're looking for a quick and easy place to get some bat resources, the Iowa State University Extension website does have a few good ones. So those would be places I would send folks to learn a little more if you wanted like a quick fact sheet. Okay, so Iowa's bat species. We are just going to talk about these guys each in turn. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but let's see, our hoary bat. These are the bigger bat species on this slide. We'll look at the littler ones on the next slide. But hoary bat is who we just talked about here. Hoary bats and silver-haired bats are both a little bigger. They have a little bit bigger wingspan. So what they do is they fly longer distances at higher altitudes. So these guys, we don't catch them. So the way we catch bats is in a net. I don't remember whether I've talked about this elsewhere in the program, but how many of you guys have been out to Bob Van Ersveld's and seen his mist nets for birds? A handful of people have. I think of it as like it looks sort of like a chain link fence. You set it up, you stretch it between poles, and then it's loose. It's a lot looser than a fence, and it has pockets. So the bats or the birds will hit it, and they will fall into the pocket of the net. And we only discovered we could do this. So people were using these for birds. It was actually, I think, a traditional hunting method in some parts of the world, where they would hunt for birds that way. And then they realized they could use that for research. And then bird researchers started catching bats. And there were a few crazy people who were like, I'd been wondering how I could get my hands on more bats. And so they started using these for bats at night. So that's kind of how we get our hands on bats. And like I mentioned, these two bigger bats, the hoary and the silver-haired, are hard to catch. We don't see them very often. So I think I have caught these each at least once, and that was a big moment because we don't see them that often. And they are the pretty ones, Okay. The one that we catch commonly is this guy, the eastern red bat. Eastern red bats are a little bit fun. They've got that fun color. They have sort of that squished-looking face, more pug-like than some of the other bats. And they have really round ears, and they're extra furry because they spend a lot of their time hanging out under tree leaves. So I have never successfully seen this, but I'm on the lookout now because my favorite professor, I heard him give a talk earlier this summer, and he was saying he lives in Pella, and they have concerts in the park at Pella, and he said he's been sitting at a concert and looked up and seen one of these because where they hang out is under leaves. So they hang out on the bottom side of the leaf as the leaf is attached to the tree. And this works really well for them in the fall because they have really superb camouflage. So these guys on a dead leaf just look like more dead leaf, right? So that's a good spot for them. But because of that, because they're not in any sort of cozy roost, they're a little extra furry, and I think that's another thing I like about them. And these guys will never be in your house. None of those three that I mentioned would ever be in your house because the ones are not hanging out down here, right? Those first two are flying up pretty high. And this guy is a tree bat. Trees are his jam. So he would not be around a house at all. Unfortunately, big brown bat, this is the guy we most commonly see in houses. If you've had between 1 and 20, and I hope you haven't had 20 bats in your house, but if you've had any number of bats in your house that's not too extreme, it was these guys. We will look at little brown bats. They tend to hang out in big colonies. So if you ever had a ton of bats somewhere, those might have been little brown bats. But yeah, so that's our big brown bat. And the thing to know about him or her is that they are beetle eaters. What's the texture of a beetle like? Crunchy. What kind of teeth do you have to have if you're tiny and you eat beetles? Huge, sharp teeth compared to the size of your body. So these guys have a bad attitude and huge teeth, and unfortunately, these are the bats that we meet the most. So that's really too bad. These guys are almost single-handedly they're almost single-handedly the reason bats have such a bad reputation, I would say. And sometimes you'll still get one that's chill, right? They're mammals, just like dogs or people or cats. They each kind of have their own personality. If you catch enough of them, you'll get ones that'll hang out fine and ones that will not. But they're kind of bitey. And think, if you got caught by something, I don't know the math, but many, 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 many times bigger than you would do your best to scare it off too, and that's what he's got. He's got sharp teeth, so he's going to use them. And then this little guy is the evening bat. And these guys, I don't really know. I don't have anything super exciting to say about them, but they are one that is spreading. So they're actually doing a little bit better than some of our other bat species, and so are big brown bats. So both of these have been doing okay, increasing in numbers. So that's kind of nice to know. All right, let's look at our next ones. Okay, so you'll notice if you look at the scientific name on these guys, they are all either Myotis or Perimyotis species. That's or genus. They're all in the genus Myotis, or there's one that's Perimyotis. These guys are the ones who tend to be struggling with white nose syndrome. So I think we'll talk about white nose syndrome a little bit more on the next slide. But the Indiana bat actually wasn't doing that well even before white nose syndrome came on the scene. So this guy has been endangered. Let's see. Oh, I did write notes for this one, so I'm gonna read you off of my notes because this was something I just learned recently. So these guys were listed as an endangered species in 1967. So the Endangered Species Act came into being in 1966. So basically, as soon as we had an Endangered Species Act, we were like, these guys need to go on that list. They were first described to science, get this, in 1928. In terms of science, that is so recent, right? There are not that many species that we've known about for less than 100 years, but this is one of them. So like I said, bats, there's a lot we can learn about them. There's a lot that we just don't know. It's a great field of science. That's what I always tell kids. If you're going to maybe look into science, if you want to make new discoveries, right, we're probably not going to discover a new species of bird. We love birds. We've been looking at birds for years and years and years in great detail. Bats, not so much. There's still a lot we could learn about them. So these guys, the Indiana bat, just described to science in 1928. There are about 4 cave systems in the world that all of these bats roost in. Obviously, some of them are in Indiana, but some of them are also in Missouri. And what else did I want to tell you about them? Well, hang on. We'll get to them in a minute. So northern long-eared bats, they moved from threatened to endangered in 2022. So that's the guy with the person's holding them in blue gloves up in the corner. Those are the ones that I got to focus on. Actually, I think that is a picture that I took, which is kind of fun. Little brown bats, these guys are, I think, now listed. They're currently under review to be listed. They certainly will be. These used to be equally common with the big brown bat, and they've just plummeted. So when I did my bat work, I think in 2018, I want to say, we were still catching them. By 2024, people were barely catching, or the last couple years, people barely find them. They just plummeted, and that's that white nose syndrome, which we'll talk a little bit about next. Tricolored bat is just another little guy. Okay, so Dallas Mines. This is one of the mines where the Indiana bats roost. So it is in Hannibal, Missouri, and it is one of the 4 major hibernacula that Indiana bats use. And the vast majority of our Indiana bats in Iowa go there. And Indiana bats are primarily found south of Interstate 80. So maybe up to Highway 30, but more the south half of Iowa. And they will migrate down to Dallas Mines. This is one of my dear friends. She works for Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, and they actually protected Dallas Mines because it was a mine system in Hannibal. People would go in there and do whatever people want to do, hanging out in caves, basically caves, man-made caves, mines. And they said, we would really be best for the bats if we could keep people out of there because, they're already having a hard time. We don't need people in there throwing parties or bringing in various pests or moving pathogens in and out, right? Because we know that white nose syndrome we think it was brought over by hikers who had been cavers, really, who had been spelunking in Europe and came into the eastern United States. And European bats have lived with white nose syndrome forever, and it doesn't bother them so much. North American bats, not well adapted to it, gives them a really hard time. So the way this works is you can see it's like a fungus. So this is gross, but it helps me to think of it as like being kind of like athlete's foot, right? It's itchy, it's uncomfortable. So you can see the fungus on the bat's nose, but what it really does is it'll get on their wings too, and their wings will get itchy. And when they hibernate, hibernating is pretty high risk. So if you look at the bats that we have, they're all tiny. Can they pack on the pounds for a long winter of hibernation? Certainly not, right? They don't weigh anywhere close to a pound. So they they have to really conserve their resources. Well, so that's why they go to caves or find other places where they can find that sweet spot temperature-wise, where they can really slow their body systems down. Um, and then if they wake up in the middle of winter, they're going to use up the limited energy that they've, stored away for winter, and that's what's really risky for them. So if you hear of white nose syndrome, what it's doing is it's basically using up their energy reserves in the winter. So we are tracking how many bats there are there, and I'm going to flip back because I had a little bit more in my notes on the other page. So in 2019, they because they all go to a cave, it's pretty easy to count them, right? If we know there's 4 caves where we can look for these bats, for the vast majority of them, then we can count, well, how many do we have, which is kind of cool. So they do a census of them every 2 years. And I guess the most recent data I have was 2019. The count was about 500,000 total in North America. So if there's enough that you can count them right down to the last bat, that's probably too few, right? That's a really low number as wildlife species go. And yeah, so like I mentioned, Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation does protect the caves in Missouri. They almost only work in Iowa, but they thought this was such an important project that they had the right kind of staff and knowledge to do that. Okay, back to our true-false game. Now that we got all the basics covered, you're all experts on all 9 species of bats we have in Iowa. So we have 9 in Iowa, but true or false, there are over 1,000 species worldwide. Haven't gotten into the tricky part of this yet. You guys are all right. That's true. The number is always going up. The reason it goes up isn't necessarily because we're like, whoa, I've never seen this before. It's more because we've been able to do genetic research and separate out things that we thought looked the same, but might actually genetically be different species. So the current count is about 1,400. About 70% of these bats are insectivores. So they primarily eat insects. That's certainly true for 100% of our 9 Iowa bat species, and that's true for most bats around the world. Insects are the big thing they do. 30% are fruit or pollen-eating bats. As you can imagine, to make a living doing that, you need to live somewhere where there's fruit and pollen available year-round. Again, hence way more bats able to survive at the tropics, so many different species, a lot more differentiation between species, because there's a little bit more available to them. And then there are maybe a dozen total species. So out of 1,400, maybe 12 are carnivorous species. So besides the vampire bats, there are the 3 that feed on blood, but there are also some that eat various other things like fish even. So I've got a slide on that in just a second. So yeah, and like I said, those numbers are always increasing because we're just learning more as we go. Okay. So there are pollen and nectar eating bats. So this guy is the lesser long-nosed bat. They're the primary pollinator of agave, and I am almost always presenting to children, but adults, if you have ever enjoyed a beverage with tequila, think a bat. Because that is like the thing that pollinates agave are lesser long-nosed bats. And this guy is not yellow, he's covered in pollen. And they also feed on other night-blooming cacti. So you can see they would be a good pollinator, right? Because they are taking plenty of pollen from plant to plant the way they've got it all over their body like that. And they'll migrate following the bloom. So as it warms up further north, they will move with the bloom, which is kind of cool. And these guys are found in the southwestern U.S., as you would imagine. So that's a good guess. Yeah, I know for sure like the Sonora Desert, right? So I would think Carlsbad too. Okay, and then if we want to talk about fruit bats, the one that we hear the most about, the one that gets a lot of attention, is the giant golden-crowned flying fox. So flying foxes are just a whole category of big fruit bats, and they're large. I think this guy has a wingspan of 5 feet long, and with a 5-foot-long wingspan, what would you guess he weighs, or she? A little more than that, but that is a good guess. I see a 2. Yeah, they might weigh as much as 3 pounds, but that's it. So still, much less than like a Chihuahua, even though it has a 5-foot wingspan. So yeah, and I just always, when I do this presentation with kids, I've always got to talk about the baby bats, because what are bats? They're mammals, right? So just like any other little orphaned mammal, we have to warm them up and give them bottles if they get if they get separated from their mom. So I always try to include a picture of bats in blankets having a bottle, because it's just too cute. And these guys feed primarily on fig species, they're only found in the Philippines. We do have some technically like American flying fox species if you count like the Mariana Islands, right? So there's a Mariana flying fox as well. Since that's technically an American territory, we can sort of claim like, yeah, we've got these. Okay, here's a completely different kind of fruit bat, wrinkle face bat. Now, prepare yourself for this one. Okay, so on my very first day of a college biology class, my professor, Dr. B, who I've mentioned multiple times, put this picture up and was like, here's the thing to know about, the class is called Diversity of Life. Here's the thing to know about all the different kinds of critters there are in the world. They have got a place. They've each got a niche. They've each got a thing that they're good at, a thing that they do. They're a lot easier to appreciate when you know that about them than when you let yourself be caught off guard, right? And you're like, oh, what was that? Why does it look like that? What's wrong with it? So this is another fruit bat, but it feeds specifically on fruit juice. So if you think about that, those wrinkles work really well to direct the juice to their mouth. If you put this bat on its back and use an eyedropper and drop fruit all over its face, no matter where on its face you drop that fruit or that juice, it's going to make its way to the mouth, and you know what it's going to bypass? The eyes and the nose. So those wrinkles act like a perfect little funnel system to get this guy what he needs. And I think, these guys aren't, I think my understanding is that they just kind of like wrap around the fruit with their little body and just get as much juice as they can at a time. And so it's a messy business, so they also don't have fur on their face, because that would be a sticky mess, right? And these guys are primarily found in Central America. So we did not catch one of these my year going to the tropics, but that trip, the Central College trip, has caught them before, which I'm maybe a little jealous of. Okay, and then another cool one are carnivorous bats. So carnivorous bats will prey on small fish or small amphibians or small mammals. And I do think we caught one of these when I was in the tropics. So the fish-eating myotis lives near the Gulf of Mexico, and they're pretty small, right? We talked about those myotis species that we have in Iowa. There are little guys. They're even by Iowa bat standards, myotis ones are small. So this is a small bat. You can see he has some adaptations for catching fish. So he's got those long toes for grabbing them. He does not have hair on his tail membrane. And then just like the powerful flight muscles to be able to lift something out of the water. Now, it's a risky business, because if you catch the wrong fish and you're only this big, you're going for a swim, right? But for whatever reason, they've differentiated. This is their skill. This is what they focus on, is catching fish to survive. And I did find a Smithsonian article about this, if you're like, I want to know more about carnivorous bats. How are we on time, Sarah?
We are about time to take a break. If this isn't a good spot, though, we can go. Okay, this is a good spot. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so let's take maybe just less than 10, just a few minutes, because I want to get back to. I'm sorry, but I do want to get back to learning more about what you have to say, Amy. So let's take about 5, maybe 8 minutes. I'll ring the bell. There's more cookies and coffee out there if you'd like some. So take a short break.
False questions here. We're going to get a little bit into bat anatomy, which is cool and fun to talk about. So if you took a good look at that bat that I brought around, or if you want to see it after, that's a really good way to look at their different body parts. But true or false, bats are, I put it up already, whoops. True or false, bats are the only mammal capable of true flight. I did not mean for this one to necessarily be a tricky one. I think in a group of adults, we pretty much know this. Now with a group of kids, I get a lot of answers that are like, what about flying squirrels? Flying squirrels, do they fly or do they glide? Do you know? They glide, yeah. So true, bats are the only ones capable of true flight. Compared to birds, bat anatomy is actually a lot more similar to us, to humans, as their fellow mammals, right? We actually have more in common with them. I see Kim putting her fingers out. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Okay, so let me get this guy up here. So this is a picture of the pallid bat, which is a bat that lives in the desert southwest. This picture gets used a lot in slideshows that I have seen here in Iowa because, again, that same professor took this picture. But I had asked him, will you please send it to me because it is about the best way to get a look at their body, especially up on a big screen like this. I've done this before where I've tried to show people with my little real bat. Much easier to see it on the big screen. So I'm going to grab my pointer here. Okay, so this is a reference that is sort of lost on me, but if you're very familiar with like the movie The Terminator and Arnold Schwarzenegger, this bat has sort of a bodybuilder body, right? It has huge shoulders, tiny hips, and then and the reason it has such big shoulders, this is where the vast majority of its small amount of mass is up here in its shoulder muscles. If you think about the motion that it takes to fly, and we're a little too crowded to do this in here, but basically you're flexing in and out with your shoulders. If I do that even a few times, I'm like, oh, I start to feel that. And that's what they're doing all the time. Because, of course, to fly, it's constant motion. So they've got to have huge muscles available to them. But then they want to trim as much weight everywhere else as they can, right? So hence the tiny hips, tiny legs as well. Okay, so they have hand bones that are really quite similar to ours. So we'll just look at their whole arms. So from shoulder to elbow, right? That's our humerus, right? And then they've got a fused radii and ulna, but it would look similar to ours. It's just theirs are fused together. And their radius and ulna is about twice as long as their humerus. So if you can imagine my forearm being so much longer than my upper arm. And then we get to their hand, right at the end of their radius and ulna. And it's got a thumb pointing up. They use their little thumb for climbing up trees. And then it's got fingers. So their pointer finger and middle finger, as it were, are also, they're not quite fused, but they're very close together. They lie right there together. So it might look like they only have 4 fingers, but there are two right there. You can sort of see. And then this is their ring finger, as it were, and this is their pinky. So you can see they've got their whole hand. So between their upper arm, forearm, and hand, they've got this membrane that creates their wing. And just like us, they've got knuckles. They have a fair amount of what we would call dexterity in their hands, and that allows them to steer very carefully, right? They can move a fingertip, and that will send them gliding in a different direction. So they are that's what makes them such prolific flyers, right? And such good hunters, because not only are they flying to get from place to place, all of our insectivorous bats are also needing to hunt for small, very tiny insects, right? So they've got to be able to really get around. Okay, and then of course they've got short femurs, longer tibia and fibula, and then little feet with 5 little toes. They do have a tail, and in between their tail and their legs, many bats have a tail membrane. Someone was talking to me about Mexican free-tailed bats. Those are the bats that come out from under the bridge in Austin. With a name like Mexican free-tailed bat, you can tell they live in the southern part of North America, and they do not have a tail membrane, right? It's kind of all right there in the name. Tail membrane is useful. Bats can roll it up, so they can use it. Well, first of all, they can use it like a rudder, right, to steer, but then they can also roll it up to catch bats, or to catch bugs, I mean. So sort of like to scoop, right, like more like a baseball mitt. And then, let's see. So a couple other things to note about their wings. You can see the veins going through it. Those are red. But you can also see these sort of stripes that are more lined up better. Any guess what those would be? Those are their muscles. So they're muscles to help them move the wings. And it's a membrane, so it's just like our skin is a membrane that covers our body. If you feel a bat's wings, what a lot of people say it feels like if you have them stretched out, is it feels a little bit like bubble gum if you've blown a bubble and you press inward on that bubble and it doesn't just instantly pop, right? Or pushing it on a balloon or anything like that. That's kind of the feeling of this, where it's this really thin, fine membrane. And since it has blood vessels, it can heal. So you can see there is an injury that the bat got down here, and there's a scar up there. So that one will eventually end up looking like this. We'll see that scar tissue form, but they will heal. So that's kind of nice to know as well. Okay. Any questions about bat anatomy? I may not be able to answer, but, oh, sorry. Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the tuft. Looks like a little puff of hair or something on the
Oh, yeah,
end of the hand.
I think that's the thumb of the person holding it. I think you can just see.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, yeah, so I should use that disclaimer. You can't see all the way out to the wigs. You can see the fingertips of somebody holding it. Yeah. Yeah, that is a good point. Okay. So, to stick with bat anatomy, true or false, bats use echolocation because their vision is worse than humans. Yes, I got most of you that time. So their vision is fine. When we look at their eyes, at least the number of rods they have, so rods help us see shape, cones help us see color. The number of rods that they have is similar to the number of rods that we have in our eyes. So when we're out at night, our cones don't work very well, right? If we were in here in the dark, it would be hard for me to assess anything that I was relying on my color vision for. But if I was in here at night, especially in this room with these big windows, I wouldn't risk walking in and tripping over a chair, right? I would have enough night vision to not trip over something really big right in front of me, right? And bats are like that. So they're not going to fly into you because they didn't see you. You're big enough, they will definitely see you. They might swoop close to you because we disturb the air and move bugs around us, right? Bugs are attracted to where we are, so occasionally they will swoop down close, and you might think, oh, they're coming for me, but there's probably just some gnats nearby that they're interested in. So the thing about echolocation, so is it true that bats use echolocation? Absolutely. But it's not because their vision is so bad. What they have to do is they're not in here trying to, they're not coming in here at night and thinking, I hope I don't hit a chair. They're coming in here at night and hoping I find that gnat, right? So could we come in and not trip over a chair? Yeah. Could we come in and pull a gnat out of thin air? No, right? So they need that extra boost that echolocation gives them to be able to hunt for really small things in the dark. Or in dark, right? Because sometimes they are out in places that are darker than, any dark street in Grinnell would ever be. So blind as a bat, not a very useful phrase. And some bats do have those cones to help them see color, right? It is useful if you're looking for fruit or pollen, if you're in the market for flowers. So they can navigate by sight, and this is how we catch them in nets a lot, because those nets are hard to see. If they are going down a trail, they might not be echolocating because they're just getting from A to B, and they don't need to echolocate to do that because their vision, again, is fine. But those nets are hard to see, so sometimes we'll catch them that way. But yeah, so honing in on tiny prey in the dark, that's where they need their echolocation. And just a quick reminder on what echolocation is. It's very loud. It's higher than the frequency we can hear, though. So they chirp in chords, which is interesting and maybe not something people have thought about, but they're sending out pitches at multiple frequencies. And different bats will use different frequencies because of the size of the prey that they hunt for. So we talked about big brown bats being beetle eaters. Beetles are relatively large. Other bats are more like gnat eaters. Gnats are relatively small. If you think of the size of the wave that would hit a beetle, might miss a gnat, right? If you have a larger sound wave, a lower frequency one. So they have different optimal frequencies depending on what they hunt for. And this is something that we can use to identify them. So if you've heard of listening studies for bats, where they go out and they put microphones out in the woods, this is something that actually happens kind of on the Poweshiek-Mahaska County line. There's been it's been going 3 or 5 years, a study that we've been doing where we put out microphones in the woods. We actually drive around with a microphone mounted on the top of our vehicle, too, to try to catch bats along our route to see, are bats using this habitat? We can figure out which kind of Iowa bat we might be hearing because we know that they sound different, and we have computer programs who can figure that out, too. And the way they do it is you can see they will send out a feeding buzz, so they will, just send out a few chirps, figure out, okay, is there anything out here? Okay, yeah, there is. I'm going to get closer to it. And then as they need to actually catch it, they will send out many more chirps much more quickly so that they can hone right in on their prey. So we have a game that I play with kids. It's basically Marco Polo, and I always remind the kids, the more you say Marco, the more they have to say Polo, right? But we call it bat and moth instead of Marco Polo, and we have them squeak a little dog squeaker because bats are making a pretty squeaky sound. And I tell them, the more you do that, the more you squeak your squeaker, the more the kid who's being the moth has to echo back to you, the more information you'll get, which is kind of just a fun thing we get to do at the park. Okay, true or false? Iowa's bats have average lifespans of less than 5 years. If you think about something like a chickadee or a goldfinch, small-sized birds, they often live 3-4 years. If you think of a mouse or a rabbit, they might live 1 or 2 years, so smaller mammals. Okay, so we had kind of a mixed on that one. That's good. That is false. So Iowa's bats don't really have natural predators. So, the reason rabbits have to reproduce quickly and mice have to reproduce quickly and have many litters a year and many young at a time is because they have almost no because they're highly predated, right? What on earth would be preying on a bat? Maybe an owl, maybe a house cat that is outside that shouldn't be, right? House cats belong indoors. They cause havoc in nature when they're let out. But other than that, bats have almost no natural predators. Because of that, they can have a relatively long lifespan. They can live about 12 years. The trick here is if they survive their first winter, right? So when I told you I had my little bat bodies that I have up here are juveniles. They weren't successful that first year because hibernating is hard. There's really a trick to it. It can go badly. But if they get that down, then they can live maybe up to 12 years. One wild-caught female little brown bat has lived up to 30 years, and that we know that from catching them, putting a band on them, catching them again in the future, knowing what the time difference between when we first caught them and when we last caught them. We know that it was at least 30 years. And the oldest bat we've ever known of was in Siberia. And in this case, the guess is that the going into torpor or hibernation is actually what helps them live that long, right? Because they're not active or doing much of the year. So if they can get that hibernation thing figured out, their body's not getting as much wear and tear because they're doing so much hibernating in somewhere like Siberia, right? Also crazy to think about such a tiny animal living in such a cold place. But yeah, so we know that there's one that was caught. That math isn't right. Okay, so true or false, most Iowa bats have one pup at a time. So mixed reviews. Okay, that is true. A lot of you guys got that. So you were listening. I kind of pre-led into this on the last slide. Do they need to have large litters? No, because they're not preyed on very much, right? They don't need to have super large litters because they can have one baby a year for many years in a row. So because of that, they don't reproduce quickly, and their population doesn't bounce back very quickly. So that's true. The only exception would be red bats, who might have 2 or 3 pups a year. But bats are kind of interesting. At least here in Iowa, most of our bats breed in the fall because it takes energy to do that, right? And when they wake up in the spring, their stores of energy are sort of depleted. So it's better if they breed in the fall. But then the female will store the sperm until they're ready to begin actual gestation. So it's like delayed fertilization, I think is what they call it, or delayed implantation. So gestation will actually begin in the spring when they're up and moving again, and then their pups are born in early summer. And lactating females will need to eat voraciously, and they need to return and feed their baby about every hour. So they're really the MVPs of getting a lot of bugs out of our environment, right? Because they have to feed themselves. They have an incredibly high metabolism, and they're flying a lot, and that alone is a lot of feeding. And then they have to make milk on top of that for a pup. So that's probably Also, I mean, if you think about what worked for them from an evolutionary perspective, they wouldn't have. It would be hard to feed very many pups, right? It's already kind of taxing to them to feed one pup. Okay, and bats, because of this, bats do not bounce back quickly from population losses. So historically, they weren't very likely to die early, so they could have that slow reproduction, right? What this means is with things like white nose syndrome or other threats to bats, they're not going to bounce back quickly, right? They're meant to live a long time, so if a female lives 2 or 3 years instead of 12, then that's a big impact on the population. So if you have a bat in your house and you can remove it, okay, if it were an endangered species, you would absolutely need to make sure you remove it without killing it, right? Just for legal reasons. But secondly, they do not reproduce quickly, so every loss hits them a little harder than it would something like a mouse, right? I'm not out here telling anyone, quit trapping the mice in your house. You got to do what you got to do. But for bats, if you can get them out safely, that's really best. Okay, I got a lot of questions about this during the break. Rabies, let's talk about it. True or false, 70% of bats have rabies. Okay, good. We have critical thinkers in here. False. The thing that's tricky is that any given, okay, where was it? Bats are responsible for 7 of 10 rabies cases in humans. So 7 of 10, 70% of the times that we get rabies, it might come from bats. But there, in the whole United States, there are 1 to 3 humans who could get rabies per year. And that's from the CDC. But at any given time, 5 to 10 of every 1,000 wild bats have rabies. This rate is not different than for raccoons or for other mammals. The only mammal who does better is a possum. Possums do not get rabies because their body temperature is weird. I should give a talk on possums someday. Remind me about that. Okay, so yeah, bats are responsible for 70% of humans getting rabies, but very few bats actually have rabies. Someone asked me, do bats not get sick when they get rabies? And they do get sick and die when they have rabies, but they don't do the like foaming at the mouth thing. So they don't go through that. I don't know enough about diseases to know the right word, but they don't go through that phase where they become extra dangerous, where they're going around and really trying to bite things. That's not a thing that happens to bats like it does to raccoons or to dogs. So you might not know a bat has rabies. And the other thing is that bats are dangerous because their teeth are so small. So this is probably a crowd where this will work. Has anybody embroidered or sewed by hand before? Pricked yourself with a needle, right? I like to embroider and I prick myself all the time. I might bleed. I try to make sure I don't bleed on whatever I'm sewing and I just keep going, right? I don't think anything of it. That is what it's like to get bitten by a bat, right? It is a tiny little prick. So you could miss that. You could miss that a bat even bit you. Well, if a bat that had rabies bit you, that's noteworthy, right? You need to be checked out by a doctor. You need to get the rabies vaccine. The rabies vaccine is great, right? It is great. It is not a big deal. If you have pets, your pets probably have the rabies vaccine. For whatever reason, it's a lot more expensive for humans to get the rabies vaccine, but well worth the money, right? If there's any chance that you've encountered a rabid animal, doesn't have to be a bat. If you got bit by a skunk, a raccoon, or a dog, those are probably the most likely other vectors for rabies. You wouldn't be like, well, I don't know, maybe that skunk bit me, I'm not really sure. You would know. You would be like, oh gosh, I got bitten by a skunk, and you would go to the doctor, right? But because bats are so tiny, and they are actually relatively harmless, that's the thing that makes them dangerous to us, right? We could miss the experience of getting bit by a bat and not go seek that medical attention that we need. So again, and with kids, I would say like any mammal, right? I'd really hammer this home. Any mammal. It doesn't matter if it's a puppy, right? Any mammal that you run into, if it were to bite you, you need to take that really seriously. I mean, I'll say that to you too, but I think you guys know that. Okay. And then the other thing is handle bats with caution. So this is a bat. I used to rent in Newton, and my rental house in Newton, we had a lot of bats. And I like bats. But I don't like them flying around when I'm trying to watch TV at night, right? It is just annoying. It's not my favorite thing. And sometimes when they're in my house, I still do the thing where I duck, right? I don't like it. I love them outside. And once I get them in my hand, you can see I've got it in my hand there. I've got gloves on. I did have a Bats of Iowa poster hanging in my house. So, of course, I went and took a picture of my hand with the bat and the Bats of Iowa poster. I'm just that kind of nerd. But they're fine then. They're not scary then. But when they are flying above you in a confined space, it's not the most fun. But you want to have gloves on. If you have one in your house, my strategy is, so there's a couple. What we found worked best for us was typically to just shoo it out, right? So our living room had 2 doors to it. So we would open the door to the front porch. I would stand in one door of the living room, like between the living room and the kitchen. My husband would stand between the living room and the dining room, and we would just hold a blanket up so that the only direction the bat could go was to that open porch door. And that really worked the best for us. The other strategy I've heard works really well is to take a bath towel or a blanket, and if you catch the bat at rest, just put that over it, right, and bundle it up. Take the whole thing outside. Let the bat fly away from the blanket on its own when it's ready. Watch for pets if you're doing this, right? So our move was to always kick the dogs into the backyard and take the bat out the front door. But other than that, works pretty well. Yes. Oh, sorry. Actually, can I take it? Can I take you at the end? Sorry. Yes. Okay. Because we're just about done here. I think this is my second to last slide. All right. This is my last slide. True or false? Bats come into your house because they are looking for food. Yeah. Hopefully we don't have that many insects in our house. It's all about avoiding predators and finding a comfortable temperature. So this is my sort of thrown together little graphic. It's actually easier to just like draw this on a whiteboard. But if you think of your house as being warm, your walls as having insulation in them, you have an insulated space above your house typically, some sort of attic, then you're going to have a temperature gradient. So my nice little snowflake graphic outside, right? Let's say it's cold outside, it's warm in our house. What's the space in between our walls? Is it warm, cold, or in between? It's an in-between temperature, right? Well, what do bats need to comfortably hibernate? They need an in-between temperature. I like to think of them as like lettuce, right? If you put it in your freezer, it will not keep. If you leave it on your counter, it will not keep, right? It needs that fridge temperature. It needs that in-between temperature where it can't, in bats' cases, it's to keep their metabolism doing the right thing. So when it's warm out, they are active, their metabolism is high. We know that if their metabolism is high, they burn too many calories, they don't survive the winter. But their bodies are tiny and they're mammals, so they can't handle their whole body freezing, right? Some animals can, think like frogs and turtles, they can like really put their body to sleep and they can freeze in the winter. Bats can't do that. So they need to have their blood still circulating through their body. It can't be frozen. So they will have to find that in-between temperature. And the really cool thing about our walls is that it's a gradient. So out here closer to the edge of the house, I'll go this way actually, closer to the edge of the house, it's cold outside. In here closer to where we are, we've got the heat running, it's warm inside. If the temperature changes, let's say it gets colder outside, they can scoot a little closer to where we have it warm inside. If it gets extra hot inside, they can scoot just a little closer to where it's cold outside. It is perfect for them. We made them the gosh darn most perfect spot they could ever need. And then we're mad when they come in, right? So, and it is. So I was telling Sarah this. If you have a bat problem in your house, it is not a bat problem. It's not a you problem. It is a house problem. So you have somewhere where they can get in. And because our houses are so perfect for them, they will. So get a contractor. That is my advice. I mean, and also be gentle when you remove them if you can, right? Do your best to get them out gently. But if it's a persistent problem, get someone in there, because if there's a spot they can come in, they're not going to stop finding it, right? They will keep finding that spot and coming in. Okay. And I don't even have a closing slide. I just end here and can take any questions that you guys have. Yes.
So 60 years. 60 years ago, in rural Marengo, Iowa, our daughter was sleeping upstairs in the bedroom, and we had a bat flying around in the hallway between the downstairs and upstairs. So I stood on the stairs with a hammer in one hand and a fly swatter in the other. And that bat flew a circuit flying the same circuit over and over and over again. So all I had to do was stand in the right place and swing the fly swatter as it come where I knew it was going to come. And I didn't kill it, but I wounded it. And bats can't take off without being able to fall. So before it can fall down one step, I hit it with a hammer and then picked it up and threw it outside. But, you know, I had a newborn sleeping upstairs, and what else was I to do?
Yeah, so we talked about it, right? There are other ways to get them out. Leaving a door open and helping them find their way out is best, rather than injuring them. And in the moment, though, your brain doesn't necessarily go there. So that's why I will say it again. Help them find their way out, right? Just put that in your brain. Help them find their way out, or use a blanket or something else to prevent them from going in a particular direction. But that is a thing to know. If you wake up in a room with a bat in it, you might go think about getting that rabies vaccine. Because if a bat bit you in your sleep, again, it's just so tiny. It would not hurt you at all unless it happened to have rabies. And rabies is something we have to take so seriously. Yes.
You talked about the bats being mammals.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, does the mother lactate?
Yeah.
Or does she regurgitate?
She lactates. Yeah. Yep. All baby mammals need milk.
I heard that if you put a bag or a box down, that will crawl into it to get away in the dark. And then you can pick them up and take them outside then. Have you ever heard that before?
I haven't heard that, but I've also, the other strategy I've heard people use is if you have a bat that's like on a wall or something where, you know, I told you you could throw a blanket over it, but if it's on a wall, that doesn't really work. You could use a box, right, and trap it and slide something under and take it out that direction too. And again, you do want to avoid interacting with them yourself. So you do need to figure out a strategy to get them out that doesn't involve you handling it either, right? Handling it with a blanket or handling it with a box, or I'm a goofball and I put gloves on so that I actually can look at it, but normal people don't do that. I get that. But you do want to get it out without it contacting your skin too, or its teeth contacting your skin at least, right? Yes.
We have dogs because eons ago we made friends with wolves, and dogs evolved. What did bats evolve from? There's no common predecessors that I know of.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, oh man, and again, I'm going to say first off, I am not a mammologist. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I took a few biology classes. They are more closely related to like shrews. They're not related to rodents, right? We know that rodents chew wood. Rodents are chewers. Bats are not. So we know that they're not when people say like, oh, they're like mice or they're like rats. No, they're certainly not. Mice and rats are more like beavers, right? Bats aren't like that at all. They're doing something completely different. There was, so somewhere, I know, like if you go back cladistically, and I will not know all the details on this, they share, there's like a tiny lemur that they're, or more like an eye that they're actually more closely related to, which if you think about what they look like and what we look like, and primates, they're not a primate, but they're as close to primates as they are to rodents. I don't know exactly the details on how that all came down the line.
All right, one more question. That's a great question.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
Do you know if dogs can hear the echolocation signals of bats?
Oh, that's a really good question. That's fun. Okay, so I do know that for our big bats, the hoary bat and the silver-haired bat, their frequency that they're chirping at is lower, and it is right at when you have perfect hearing, when you are very, very young. Their babies can hear at frequencies that we can't. So a baby with perfect hearing can hear the very bottom end of what bats can make. So I would assume that, yeah, some dogs certainly would be able to too. And there are sounds, so when we catch those bats, or if you have one in your house, it makes other noises besides its echolocation frequency. So they will make other noises that we hear, right? You'll hear that chattery sound. That's not their echolocation noise. I assume that's just them being loud and sort of aggressive and trying to say like, hey, get away from me. I'm going to be as loud as I can and make sure you can hear me. But Yeah, I don't know for their echolocation noises, because it's incredibly loud, so I'm sure that wouldn't be fun if they can.
That's a great question. All right, will you help me thank Amy for this presentation today? Fascinating. And Amy, I do show your box, yeah, of the bat. Oh. Oh, the bat house.
And I lost track of who brought this. Yes, this is a bat house. So I had someone ask, are those bat houses or bird houses at various places around town? The thing to look for is this slit. This is also worth mentioning as far as bats getting in your house. It can be a pretty small and innocuous spot. Bats can fit in underneath the bark of trees. That's where they should be hanging out a lot of the time. They can fit in, if you think of a book of matches, right? That little space like that is where, if you think of a folded up book of matches, that's about what the amount of space a bat needs to get in. So bat houses will have this small slit that helps keep them safe from predators. Not a lot else can fit in through that in the way of predators. And so bat houses will have that. And bat houses that are small are beneficial for just like maybe you want to encourage there to be a bat in your yard. However, big bat houses are worth doing a little research on, because bats can actually, depending on like how you place them, they can like overheat, or the temperatures just aren't quite right. What we're usually putting those out for are roosting mama bats with their babies. They nest in a big colony. We just aren't as good at finding the right spot for them as they are finding the right spot for themselves. So if you can leave a dead tree, that's by far the better place for them than a bat house. But a bat house for just like attracting a few bats to your yard for bugs, it's a good idea. It's fun.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Amy, thank you. Thank you so much, and have fun in the next couple of weeks. Enjoying, your time with your child, and look forward to seeing you again, hopefully in the spring. But I really thank you for coming today and enjoying this last day before you go on maternity leave with us. Very special. And thank you all for being here as well. Next week, we do have a program, again, starting at 10 o'clock, and it's Food Recovery Network that we're going to talk about. A really, really great project here in Grinnell that helps with reducing food waste and ensuring that those with food insecurities receive that food. So really appreciate each and every one of you being here today. Great to see you again. Have a great week. If you could help us put chairs away, that'd be wonderful. And thanks again for coming.